Before we start, maybe you'd like to just tell me where you're watching this from, and I'd love to just see who we've got out there. If you can hear me loud and clear, great. Our first one from Tbilisi, Kazakhstan, Akron, Philippines. Lovely to see all these places. India, fantastic. Saudi Arabia, Sri Lanka, more from India. This is great. Philippines. Great, wonderful to see you all out there. Welcome to our fourth Integrating TOK webinar. Today we'll be thinking about how to draw on the ideas of TOK and use them in Group 4 subjects, experimental sciences, and vice versa, try and sort of transfer scientific ideas into TOK. It's very much a two-way thing, mutual relationship, which helps to make the DP such a wonderful experience. So if you've already seen some of these webinars, we've given 3 webinars previously on integrating on TOK. You'll know what the form is. This is going to be quite similar. As with the other webinars, I would love it if there were non-TOK teachers out there. If there aren't, if you are the TOK coordinator or the DP coordinator, you can use this presentation obviously to introduce the ideas of TOK to your science teachers. So the idea is that this is pitched at non-expert TOK teachers, people who don't necessarily teach it within its own right, but try and draw on it in their lessons. So for that reason, as with the other webinars, I'll give a little introduction to what TOK is. I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by integration and why it's sometimes seen as a problem. And then I'll try and offer some ideas on how to overcome that problem. So I will go through some key TOK concepts, the 12 key TOK concepts. We'll look at some of the kind of key thinkers that work really well in both science and in TOK. I'll look at what we call real life situations, which is the evidence that we draw on to make our claims, to explore elements of the course. Then I'll talk about what we call knowledge questions, which is how we kind of discuss TOK ideas and explore TOK concepts. And then just a little bit of shameless self-promotion at the end of the webinar. You can kind of turn off at that point. But I'd like to just mention the school visits that we do, the support that we give for TOK, and very quickly how to join the site and gain access to all of the resources that we offer for TOK in itself and for supporting TOK in other classes. Okay, so the webinar will last probably an hour. I think I've said 45 minutes, but I think that's an underestimate. I think we'll probably stretch to an hour, maybe even more if I get questions. Previously in webinars, I haven't taken questions from the chat, but actually I think it works quite well. So if you can hang around a little bit after 12 o'clock my time, then I'll be happy to respond to questions. I am Michael Dunn. I am the creator of theoryofknowledge.net. We've been going for, well, around 10 years now, which is extraordinary. We've been doing these webinars more recently. We've been doing them for a couple of years now, and I love to spread these ideas and get discussions going via the webinars. I've mentioned questions on the chat, which is fine, but by all means send us emails and I will try and respond to those within the debrief. I'll send out a debrief to all ticket holders, all attendees, and the debrief will include the video recording, the presentation that you're looking at right now, and our responses to frequently asked questions from everyone that's been watching this. So if you've got any questions and you forget to send them now, that's not a problem. Just email us and we'll try and respond to them. Okay, so just a little background to what TOK is. TOK is an absolutely wonderful course. It's what makes the DP unique. It is the thing that gets me more excited than anything else. I've personally taught history, film, politics, geography. I've taught a lot of different things, but nothing has ever sort of grabbed me like TOK. I'm a big lover of history, but when I began to teach TOK, I found what I always meant to do. I love teaching TOK. I love getting discussions and debates going with my class. And it's just the course that I seem to have managed to make the most interesting for my students, the thing that has engaged them the most. And I love teaching it, and I hope that they love the lessons that I deliver. So I love TOK. I'm very passionate about it. So I'm fully on board with the idea that it's the IB's or the DP's flagship course at the center of what they do. It's a course that should last 100 hours, more or less. I think in some schools it gets less time than that, which is unfortunate. I always try and cram in as much TOK time as I can, which I've managed to do via various sneaky ways. The basic question it asks students is where we get knowledge from and what we do with it. I'll come back to the kind of questions we ask a little bit later on. We are not assessed, as you probably know, by an exam, which makes it also a wonderful experience. Instead, students write an essay, which makes up 2/3 of the final mark, and a TOK exhibition, which is a new addition to the course. The course has been updated for first exams 2022, an exhibition in which students present 3 objects. They write a commentary on that, and they link it to aspects of the course, which I'll show you in a second. Excuse me. So TOK, the other big thing about it is that it's designed to bring together different aspects of the DP, all the aspects of the DP together, because it gets students thinking critically about knowledge in all of their DP courses, in all of the 6 groups. And that's kind of the purpose of these webinars. We're going through each group and looking at how this happens within those subjects. I've identified this rather than the IB themselves, but you know, it's almost as if they did this intentionally. We hear a lot, excuse me, about the 4 C's, the skills that are identified by business leaders, by educational leaders, by political leaders as being critical to student success in the real world. Those 4 C's are critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And I think the TOK course, more than any other course in the DP, and more than any other course that I'm aware of in other educational programs, does that brilliantly. It helps them to hone those skills. And as much as possible, I try to make links to those 4 skills, because I think they're a fantastic part of TOK, and I think TOK is brilliant in developing them. So this is a quick look at the course. This is a little diagram that we've designed at theoryofknowledge.net. So these are the kind of 3 different aspects of the course. In the middle, we have the core theme, which is knowledge and the knower, which is kind of us as knowers. And around that, we have the areas of knowledge. You can see the 5 areas of knowledge there, which is the way in which we categorize ideas and concepts. Excuse me. And below that, we've got the optional themes, which are actually quite hard to pin down what they are, but I've described them as our kind of affiliations, our personal and societal affiliations, the kind of society that we belong to, the language we speak, the political views that we hold, etc., etc. And these are kind of things that affect the way we view the world and affect the way we categorize knowledge. They're also the tools that we kind of use to gather knowledge. So the optional themes are kind of an interesting part of the course, and perhaps a little hard to nail down, but that's the way in which I describe them. So that's the structure of the course. You will see, excuse me, you will see instantly that Group 4 subjects align to the areas of knowledge, to the natural sciences. Excuse me, I've got my usual cough again, which is slightly annoying. And to some degree, I suppose, technology with you know, how knowledge is produced in the sciences. So, you know, there's obviously a close relationship here between Group 4 subjects and the TOK course. So what do we mean when we refer to integration? What does it mean, first of all? Why is it a problem? Well, integrating TOK means drawing on TOK in your subject, discussing the sources of knowledge, discussing the way in which knowledge is used, thinking about how different perspectives might affect the way in which we look at the ideas and concepts that make up your subject. And also for us as TOK teachers, using scientific ideas in our lessons. So, there's this two-way relationship that should exist. The more integrated I think an educational experience is, the better it is, excuse me, for students, because life really and success is about trying to make links between everything that we do and we see and we understand. So that's kind of what integration is, but what form should it take? What should ordinary DP teachers be doing? What role should the TOK coordinator play? What role should the DP coordinator play? Those are the kind of things I will talk about today. But they're big questions, and it's quite difficult to sort out who has what responsibility when it comes to integrating TOK. I think, excuse me, the traditional way of teaching TOK hasn't always served this well. Traditionally, if we go back to, excuse me, if we go back to, sorry, so if we go back to our structure there, traditionally TOK has been taught via these different parts of the course. Okay, so we spend several weeks on the arts, we spend several weeks on history, we might then look at the NOAA, we might look at a few weeks on politics, and that's okay for getting through the TOK course. But it makes integration very difficult because during the time in which, for example, you might be doing the arts, how do I play a role as a biology teacher? It's going to be quite hard for me to make any contribution to what we're doing in the arts. I mean, you can make links, but they're going to be difficult for us to do. We are teachers, we are overworked, we have insufficient time to get everything done. So I think for the most part, if we do teach it like that, it's going to be very hard to integrate the course. Teachers are going to feel kind of locked out, and they can't really be a useful participant in the TOK experience. So I figured out a different way of delivering TOK. I mean, it's not my original idea. Other people do it in this way, sort of thematically. But I came up with 6 big questions that can be answered by any subject teacher, including science teachers. And every teacher can have an answer to this, can have an opinion on these 6 big questions. And this means that at any point during the course, whilst we're doing these 6 big questions, any teacher can play a role. So the TOK teacher can say, go off and ask this question to your Spanish teacher, go off and ask this question to your sports science teacher, go off and ask this question to your biology teacher. And so at any point, we can draw on your expertise as science teachers, but also you can play a role in helping us to deliver the ideas that we look at in the TOK course. So what are these questions? Well, the questions are here. These are our basic big questions. Excuse me. I won't read through each one. You can see them for yourselves. You'll get this presentation, so you can have a look at them in your own time. But these are the questions we ask, and you can see that they're very easy to adapt to any of the DP subjects. Anyone can talk about the relationship between their subject and ethics, values, big question 2. Anyone can talk about how new knowledge is created in their subject, how things change over time, which is big question 5. Anyone can talk about what it takes to be a discerning knower, a nuanced thinker, an expert, as big question 6 asks. So at any point during the course, you as a science teacher or whatever you teach can play a role in TOK and can draw on what we are doing in TOK lessons. Now, those are the kind of generic questions that we ask overall in TOK, but we can adapt those questions and align them really well with any subject, okay, so that you can adapt them to any subject. Here's how we might do it for physics. You can do it for any of the group 4 subjects in this way. So For example, big question 3 is all about communication, about spin. So that original big question becomes, how is our understanding of physics influenced by the way knowledge is communicated? In other words, excuse me, the kind of language that we use, maybe the visual representations of concepts in physics that we use, the clarity with which experts are able to deliver ideas in physics. You have someone like Richard Feynman, say, who's an incredible speaker and an incredible communicator, versus someone, well, I don't need to name anyone, but I think it's fair to say that some of the ideas in physics are very, very hard to communicate, and even experts sometimes struggle to get across ideas clearly. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we might be looking at in big question number 3. So we can very easily adapt those original big questions that we use into the context of physics or any other of the group 4 subjects. Okay, so that's what we mean generally by integration. That's how we do it at theoryofknowledge.net, and the schools that use the website base their course on that. But let's sort of try and talk about some more specific ways in which we can do this. I think it's clear why this is worth doing. It can certainly enrich students' understanding of the experimental sciences. Science is all about questioning the data. It's all about replication. It's all about using demonstrable evidence for your claim. So it's very closely aligned to TOK. Excuse me. I think this approach also taps very nicely into the 4 C's, as we've mentioned. Okay, so that's great. That's wonderful. We want to integrate. But how do we do it? So I want to give some more practical, specific ideas for how this can be done in the experimental sciences in group 4 subjects. All right, so first of all, and this is another new addition to the TOK course for what we are now teaching. The IB have introduced 12 key concepts. There are many concepts, many ideas in TOK that we look at. It's a very concept-rich course, but they've picked out 12 that students should be very clear about, should have a good amount of knowledge about. And I think they provide a great structure, a great framework, a great kind of scaffold for our learning. And again, there's something that can be transferred quite easily into any context. We can look at these concepts in any of the experimental sciences, in any of the group 4 subjects, in any aspect of the DP in general. So they're a great access point for TOK, for ordinary DP teachers. If you're not doing anything else, then these are the kind of ideas, these are the kind of concepts that obviously work fantastically for us, and can be drawn on by students when they write their TOK essays, when they write when they design their exhibitions, but also even in their coursework and their exams in group 4 subjects. Again, I won't read through them, you can see them all for yourself, but I'd like to focus in on some of them and sort of show you how they might be kind of covered. I think there are concepts that are good to delve into and understand in themselves, but I also think that they can lead on to some fantastic discussions, not just in TOK, but in group 4 subjects. So here's what I mean by that. Here are some ideas. So I love drawing on quotes as a kind of starting point for discussions. I might just move this so that you can see that top quote. So if we're looking at evidence, evidence is obviously one of the key aspects of group 4 subjects. And the idea is that, these subjects are evidence-led. We can't fit the evidence around what we want to believe. A lot of people try to do that. I won't mention any names. But the Kepler there shows how it should be done. You have these, as Carl Sagan puts it, long cherished beliefs that you cling on to. And sometimes, these long cherished beliefs have taken us years and years to build up. We've gathered evidence for it. We think, this is a very valid way of looking at this aspect of the scientific world. And then suddenly new evidence comes along and it smashes everything that we thought was true. And that's what Carl Sagan is looking at there. So, you know, a fantastic opportunity for a discussion there. How many students are willing to be evidence-led? How many of them are willing to change their ideas when the evidence contradicts what they think is the case? That's a you know, wonderful quote there from Carl Sagan. Objectivity. So, I mean, very, very similar, very related to evidence. You know, we have to be objective about what we believe, certainly when it comes to science in any case. Excuse me. And as Adam Smith puts it there, you know, science can be a great antidote to superstition and having beliefs that don't sort of line up with being objective about the world. Perspectives, also related really. Science is global. I mean, there are quite a few quotes that are similar to this about maths as well as about science. You know, this is the idea that it's universal. And well, this would be a good thing to challenge. You know, we often, as I will show you in a second, excuse me, have perspectives that clash with these so-called truths, and actually that's quite a dangerous word in science, as we know, but you know, factually based claims are sometimes challenged according to your political perspective, according to your religious perspective, etc., etc. But you know, if you are following the science, if you're following the evidence, as we keep hearing politicians talking about, well, they do it in a completely different way. We should arrive at something that is global, that is not differentiated according to race or whatever else the perspective is you're thinking about. This is interesting. I mean, I think it's sometimes easy to romanticize science. You know, it's done by a bunch of people who are completely selfless and only interested in the knowledge itself, and are completely open-minded and willing to accept new evidence. Of course, it's done by humans, and humans aren't like that. So, you know, this is a great quote there from Francis Darwin. In science, the credit goes to the man who convinces the world, not the man to whom the idea first occurs. In other words, if you can, you know, market your idea better than people beforehand, sometimes that can be more important than the value of your discovery, which I think is a great talking point. Truth. Well, I've said, you know, truth is a very complex word, a very complex concept. It's, you know, one of the things that we're very interested in exploring in TOK, and I think this really nicely sums up truth in science. You know, the idea that truth has a lifespan. So does that mean it's truth? Is there any truth in science? You know, it's something that your students can think about. And values. I mean, there is a complex relationship, very complex relationship between science and values. I mean, we could easily say that science is amoral, but the way we use science often has deeply moral significance and implications. And so I can think of few discussions that would be more interesting and more engaging for your students than getting them to talk about the relationship between ethics and science. So those are a few of the 12 key concepts, a few ideas connected to them, a few great thinkers that we could draw on to explore them. And I think just shows how, you know, we can take TOK ideas and place them into any science class and get a great discussion going. Okay, so you know, obviously we try and focus as much as we can on some great thinkers in TOK, and there are a lot of scientific thinkers that we find interesting. I mean, you know, there are hundreds, thousands of great scientific thinkers, but here are some of the ones that I have enjoyed looking at with my students that work really well to help them understand scientific ideas. We've been talking about communication. All of these people are fantastic communicators, which is great when you're dealing with quite complicated and abstract terms and concepts. So these are taken from the TED Talks. You know, when you get this presentation, you can click on the links and follow them to the talk. I mean, I try to, I don't use the whole of TED Talks. I use little chunks. And on the site, I have some support for that with questions and the point in the video where you can ask them. But yeah, I tend to give them 2 or 3 minutes at a time. I don't overload them. But I think the TED Talks are a fantastic resource. Here are 4 of them. So Molly Crockett is brilliant. She talks about, well, she's actually a neuroscientist, so she's kind of she's on the cusp of natural sciences and human sciences, but we can use her here. And she talks a lot about how the media reports scientific ideas, and how, in simplifying the ideas that they look at, and sometimes making logical and intuitive sort of links with the ideas there, you can get completely the wrong idea of the scientific experiment that was run to set up the story. And she talks about her own experiment, which ended up being very, very bizarrely presented by the press. And she has some great terms for marketing scientific products, usually to do with the brain, to try and sort of make you think that, drinking this will make you more energized, or make you cleverer, or make you more beautiful, whatever it is, these fantastic claims. And she goes through all of this, and it's a great talk, full of kind of critical thinking tips, and full of ideas on linking language with science. So this is really, really a great talk that I use quite a lot. Ben Goldacre is a really good writer. He's very, very active on social media. He's worth following on Twitter. And he also talks a lot about the way the media reports science and how completely misleading it is. He talks a little bit more, excuse me, he talks a little bit more about the motives and the agendas behind that. Molly Crockett talks generally about, how ideas can become simplified, but not necessarily trying to manipulate you, but Ben Goldacre goes a little more into that, and talks about how newspapers often have a mission to make you think in a certain way, and if not dumb down, then certainly sort of mistranslate the science that is at the heart of the stories that he's looking at. Stuart Firestein is hilarious. He's a brilliant talker. And we have this idea, we teach in TOK that scientific knowledge is created via the scientific method. But of course, that's often not the case. It's often not, very sort of measured and clinical, and goes in one sort of direction and leads to an inevitable result. It is often, as I think he puts it, farting around in the dark, which is quite a different sort of way of looking at science compared to the scientific method. So he talks about that, and it's really, really fun, his talk. It really is a great sort of, it's great for challenging this assumption that science happens in a way that I think most people envisage it, and it doesn't always happen like that. It's a lot more accidental sometimes. Although, as Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind, and I think what Stuart Firestein talks about shows that as well. So, although it's kind of accidental, although it's often haphazard, the training that you have and the sort of mental outlook that you have as a scientist allows you to kind of make the most of that nature of being haphazard. The last one is a great talk as well by Naomi Oreskes, and I refer to this quite a lot because it's a really interesting idea. We think that the kind of key way that we connect to science is sort of logic-based, reason-based, based on the evidence, as I have said. But the fact of the matter is, and if you're like me, you're a bit of a crap scientific thinker. I mean, I love science. I kind of love the idea of science more than being very good at science. If you're like me, if you're like most people, you have only a tiny sort of amount of scientific knowledge, and even specialists. Richard Dawkins himself has said this. We cannot know all the science. We can only know a tiny fraction of the science. Even experts, if you're an expert in biology, you will be lost when it comes to sort of astrophysics. So we have to put our faith in scientists. And trust what they are saying, because even if they present you with the evidence, you're not going to understand it. So there's a lot of faith in trusting science. But as she talks about, it's quite a different type of faith than other forms of faith. And it does all ultimately depend on this sort of jigsaw that fits together, because that if one part of it doesn't fit, then the rest kind of falls apart. So it's that kind of faith. You might not know what the other pieces of the puzzle are, but you do know what that piece is, and you know that fits in. And so I don't know, it works something like that. So it's a really, really nice talk to look at. She's a really, really good thinker, and I think that's a really important concept for students to have. Okay, so lastly, this is something that's quite close to my heart. I mean, I work quite hard on this. So TOK is often seen, I think incorrectly, as being very abstract, as being, well, it is concept driven, but those concepts need to be applicable to the real world. Otherwise, there's no point really in exploring them, in learning them. So we try to explore ideas, explore claims, explore debates and discussions via real life situations. So we mean by that news events, issues that are going on in the world, experiences that the students have themselves. Real life situations can be on any level. They can be personal to the student. They can be sort of very local to your school. They can be national, regional, global. So they can be virtually anything. Anything that sort of makes us question what we know and how we know it is a good real life situation. And that's one of the wonderful things about the TOK course, because it's always up to date, or it should always be up to date. What's happening in the world right now, what's going on right now. Your students can bring their own ideas, their own experiences into the TOK classroom, and hopefully the science classroom. So this is our kind of bread and butter, if you like. We ask certain questions, but we explore them via real life situations. This is the evidence that we use when we make a claim, and I really like that myself. I don't like hypothetical situations. I don't like in philosophy they tend to be too abstract. It's one of the reasons why TOK is not philosophy. It absolutely isn't philosophy. It's much more based in the real world. Okay, so let me again give some examples here. So I publish a newsletter every month. We look at about 20 different stories, 20 different real life situations, and that's how I like to explore TOK. That's how I try to make my lessons as engaging as possible. So here are some of the things that I've spotted recently that I've put in the newsletter. So Anthony Fauci, first of all, again, linking back to perhaps what Naomi Oreskes is talking about, how even if we can't understand all the evidence and we can't understand all the science, we should trust and we should put our faith in scientists. It's a really good interview. And he explains how that can work and should work. There's no escaping the COVID pandemic, I'm afraid, in these real life situations. But TOK is a great way of exploring what's going on at the moment. So a lot of people have been unnerved, I suppose. They're worried by the fact that in the scientific thinkers that are kind of leading the fight against coronavirus often change their mind, sometimes seem to do these U-turns. We have advice on, say, using masks or not using masks and then using masks. We have sometimes different advice in different countries, although that normally comes from the politicians. We are constantly changing our understanding of how to treat this terrible disease. But this is a great article about how we shouldn't be worried about that, how we shouldn't view that as a failure of science. Absolutely the reverse. If we understand the nature of science, then we should understand that this is how science works. It is based on doubt. It's not based on certainty. We offer a claim, we offer an idea, and it has a certain mortality, as we've just seen in that other quote. It lasts only until the next better claim comes along. and it becomes better and better over time, but it changes over time. So science in this article is shown to be working because of those changes of opinion, that's in no way undermines science. So this is a great talking point again for students. I mean, you could set it up by perhaps talking about the changes that have happened, different advice that has been offered by Anthony Fauci and other people, and then get the students' reaction, and then offer them this article. Excuse me, and then get their opinion. I mean, you could get some great discussion going. Is this the characteristic of a strong field or a weak field? And I hope they end up realizing that, you know, certainty is often the same as dogmatism, which we want to avoid if we're going to understand the world properly. The third article there, the third real life situation, is what's happening at the moment in the Natural History Museum in London. A fantastic museum, an amazing place, but unfortunately one that is very much bound up with imperialism. You know, most of the exhibits were stolen from places around the world in the sort of late 18th and 19th centuries. And there's a little bit of disquiet at the moment because of the sort of social situation, the Black Lives Matter protests, etc., on some of the ways in which these exhibits are presented, the exhibits themselves, and some of the thinkers behind the exhibits, which is, I think, a very interesting issue. Do we need to reevaluate the knowledge that we have gathered, the way in which we present that knowledge, based on what's going on in society at the moment? And it doesn't have to just apply to Black Lives Matter. There are a lot of things going on in society at the moment which make us question the way in which we've gathered knowledge in the past, which make us question the kind of priorities and the knowledge that we have. You know, does this change our knowledge? Does this change our scientific knowledge? Should we change you know, the way in which we do things? So that's a really interesting article to get a discussion going there. You know, anti-vaccination is obviously very much in the news at the moment. You know, we are all of us, most of us are hoping for a vaccination against COVID as soon as we possibly can. But then you have many people who wouldn't actually take it because they don't trust the vaccination. They have lots of different ideas about why you shouldn't trust vaccinations. It's wrong to see this sort of group of people as homogenous. There are loads of different reasons for anti-vaccination beliefs. In this interview with Jonathan Berman, he talks about how you should engage in discussion with people who may not have valid evidence for the claims that they offer. And you know, the key to this obviously is not shouting them down, not contradicting them. It is, well, he's got some great ideas, so that's worth looking at. And I think this goes back to the idea of communication. You know, communication is as much about listening to the other side as it is about offering your opinion. And I think that comes across in this article. Wow, this last story is pretty extraordinary. Out of body gestation. In other words, the fetus comes to term in these kind of very, very sci-fi kind of gestation bags, which, yeah, it's really freaky. It's definitely the stuff of science fiction movies, but they have begun to do this with animals. And obviously that throws up some massive ethical issues and possibilities for debate. It's a very interesting story, that, and yeah, I think the gateway into some really, really good talks with your students about that. Okay, so those are just, you know, a very, very few examples of what's going on in the scientific world right now, and the kind of thing that we would be very interested in looking at in TOK. And as I've said, as a non-expert, you know, the kind of thing that we would love, you know, science teachers to give their opinions on and their kind of guidance to students about, because I think this works fantastically well in both our areas of the DP. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the way in which we frame discussions. And as I've said in other webinars on this, any discussion is great. Getting students to offer their opinions is, one of the easiest ways of empowering young people, and, just hearing them, just listening to them, encouraging them to talk. That's the best part of the job, I think, just listening to the ideas of your students and hearing them discuss with each other great ideas, or not great ideas, any idea. I just like hearing them talk. I like hearing who they are. I like hearing their opinions. So if you can get a discussion going, that's great. Don't worry too much whether it's the right thing for TOK. However, I suppose it is worth saying how we try to do it in TOK. So we try and frame our discussions around what we call knowledge questions, and they are key to the TOK essay more than the exhibition. They're key to the TOK essay. The knowledge question is sort of found in the title of the essays, and they are expected to offer claims and counterclaims to the knowledge question, and think both sides and put the question into different contexts, which they do by putting it into the context of the areas of knowledge. Now, what are knowledge questions? Well, they are questions about knowledge. They are questions about how we know. You can sort of divide them into two. There are first order knowledge questions, which is about what we know. It's about the world directly. It's what we do in DP subjects. It's what is photosynthesis. It's what temperature does water boil at? It's questions like that. Why are trees able to grow so tall? Why is grass green, etc., etc. I'm just looking out of my window and coming up with those questions. So that's first order, and that's what we do really most of the time in the ordinary DP subjects. In TOK, we try and ask second order questions. We try and think about second order knowledge, which is how we know. Okay, so how do we know what photosynthesis is? How do we know, why trees are so tall? Why do those ideas change over time? Why do different scientists sometimes have different opinions? How do they come up with the answers to what they're looking at? So, we're not interested in the scientific theories themselves, but we are interested in how you might come up with a scientific theory, how scientific theories are challenged. Sometimes maybe there's an agenda behind a scientific theory, in which case it probably isn't science, but anyway, has this amazing conclusion about a certain issue in science been funded by Coca-Cola, in which case maybe there's something wrong with that conclusion. So that's the kind of thing that we look at in TOK. And that's where the integration comes in. That's where you can do what we're doing, and hopefully enrich the subject that you're teaching. So we focus on second order. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's try and put this into context again by looking at some real life situations. So you can see here as well that I've highlighted words there that relate to or are the 12 concepts of TOK. So the first one's all about climate change. Now, in ESS, say, or in biology, or in geography from group 3, you do a lot of work on climate change. You do a lot of work on what's causing climate change. Obviously, we have that crucial link between climate change and human activity, which is all fascinating and brilliant in its own right. But what we might do in TOK is think about how that data is gathered, how we can use that data to convince people who might not want to believe in the human cause behind climate change, and then ask an even broader kind of question, which would be, what is evidence? How do you make evidence convincing? What makes evidence valid? So, there's my second order question there. What constitutes valid evidence? The answer to that could well depend on your perspective. It shouldn't, of course, it shouldn't depend on your perspective if this is science that we're doing here, but often it does. And so the type of data itself and the way in which it's presented becomes absolutely crucial. So that's a great article about a new way that we have. It's based in Europe on gathering data about climate change. But will it be enough? Will it be enough for people that they've gathered data in a new, incredible way, in a more accurate way? Will it ever be enough for some people? Will they always be switched off from believing in what is now sort of essentially a consensus in the scientific world. So, you know, a great question there, which is at the heart of a huge issue that could be discussed in science and could work really well for us in TOK. We're back to COVID again with this one. So, you know, one of the very interesting things, possibly depressing things about the COVID crisis is that this struggle to develop a vaccination has become politicized. And I've got two articles there that look at that. The first one looks at how the US election is now partly dependent on a vaccine appearing. If it appears next week, then, you know, we will have one outcome in the election. If it doesn't appear, which is very unlikely that it will until, you know, well into next year, then we will probably have another result in the election in the United States. So, you know, this relationship between politics and science is very, very interesting. The second article there from Vox is thinking more geopolitically. You know, we have all these countries racing to be the one that can say, we did it first, we got the vaccine. And the Russians have some sort of vaccine which seems to be effective, although it hasn't gone through the trials that it should do to be a properly developed drug. So in other words, you know, the politics have interfered there, and we have what might be an unsafe drug. So, you know, a question there that we could ask: how do our political perspectives shape the way we understand the world? Now, that I think would apply to us as knowers, as personal knowers, rather than maybe society as a whole. You know, how get students to think about that. Do your political perspectives, do your political affiliations shape the way you look at scientific data, that you look at scientific ideas? Which, again, great discussion to have with them. I think that would be really, really interesting. I mean, of course, it shouldn't interfere. There's another article which I haven't put here it's an interview with a scientist called Catherine Hayhoe, who's a climate scientist, and she has a wonderful quote, which is something like, thermometers have no political affiliation, which is brilliant. You know, temperatures go up, it doesn't matter if you're looking at it as someone who's conservative or liberal or Tory or Labour or whatever your political parties are. The temperature is the temperature, and the data itself should not be sort of subject to that kind of that perspective. But it is. This is the real world, so, you know, your students could really explore that in detail. It'd be great. The third one is a little above my kind of pay grade. It's beyond my intellect, but, you know, that's part of being a teacher, right? You sort of present things that perhaps you don't understand as much as your students will. So sorry, I've gone forward. The third one is all about the hunt for a ninth planet and how it's really being done without empirical evidence. It's being done without, you know, me looking for a planet would be sort of looking at the sky with a pair of binoculars. No, I can't see anything. But of course, that's not how it works. It's done very mathematically. It's done in a very abstract way. The data, which is in no means sort of an image, is analyzed via high-level mathematics. So we probably won't see this ninth planet. It will just be there in a rational way, rational in the purest kind of sense of the word. So those are two articles there about how this hunt for this planet is going on. But it's not just that particular case, it's the universe in general, which is mostly not observed. It is just understood via very, very complicated mathematics, which is way beyond me. Is this true knowledge? Or is knowledge only true when you can verify it empirically, when you can see it for yourself? And I think, you know, that's an interesting topic in science, because certainly in physics there's a lot of science that can't be observed, and it is just theoretical. Is that the same type of knowledge as things that we can experiment on and we can see? I think you could get some good discussions there. Okay, so those are three examples of what we mean by second order knowledge, the kind of thing that worked very well in theory of knowledge, and hopefully would work well in group 4 subjects. Okay, so that's really all I have to say on the issue of integration. I thought I would very, very quickly, I won't bore you here, by just outlining some of our support. So, you know, I'm very, very passionate about integrating TOK. I would love to see more teachers teaching TOK. It's not generally what they think it is. It's a lot more approachable. It's a lot more interesting, and it's a lot more accessible. And I try and do my best to give lots and lots of support to non-TOK teachers as well as TOK teachers on the website that I run. So members of the site have access to the DP integration tool, which offers a folder on every DP subject, certainly every Group 4 subject. I think I'm missing business, but I've got all of the Group 4 subjects there. I'm constantly adding to this. But you as a, say, biology teacher have access to a banner that you can put up with the 6 big questions. You have access to a whole range of quotes that you can draw on. You have access to lots and lots of real life situations via really good media sources, videos, articles, podcasts, etc. And you can delve into TOK as much as you want. You can do it superficially and simply if you want, or you can go to town and you can spend a long time looking through this resource and using it to add to your own lessons. Every month, as I've mentioned, I release a TOK newsletter which has 20 different real life situations. Always there's a science subject. There are several science stories there that relate to lots of different Group 4 subjects. So this is how you can connect what you're doing to what's happening in the world right now, and at the same time also kind of tick the TOK box as you're doing it. So it's a great way of, I hope, connecting your students with what's going on right now, and also giving them some TOK. Finally, there's a resource called the Knowledge Lexicon, and that has around 1,000 different terms. Many of them very, very topical to the world right now, what's going on in the world, and you can use them. There's a link to a media source to explore each of those terms, and you can draw on that as well to look at some TOK concepts. Okay, finally, actually not finally, penultimately, and this is not the easiest thing to sell at the moment, but I love nothing more than visiting schools around the world, helping TOK teachers, but also helping non-TOK teachers understand what TOK is, why it's great to draw on. Picture there I think shows me in Doha in Qatar, which was fantastic. I met lots of people from different schools there and gave some advice on integration as well as other aspects of TOK. I love to get students passionate about TOK and really show them why they're doing this course, why it's such a brilliant part of the DP. So passion and purpose are the two things that I try and instill in students and teachers when I visit schools. Yeah, finally, I don't really need to give any details on this. If you're not a member, if you want to have a look at what membership gives you to the site, then you can just follow this link when you get this presentation. I'm about to completely launch a new website. It's launching next week, so it's going to be faster, better, more beautiful than it was before. And there's lots and lots of new resources that I'm adding to it. So it's a really, really good time to join us. Right, that's it. It's 11:54. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to have a look if there are any questions. So you can either send in, excuse me, either send in via the chat, or you can send in on the Q&A. Otherwise, I'm happy to just respond to questions if you want to send them by email. That's very easy to do. As I've said, I'll be sending out the debrief, which has access to this video, which has access to the presentation very, very shortly. Okay, so it looks like there aren't many questions, which is fine. So I will probably say farewell. Thank you very, very much. Oh, hang on, we do. Best way to end synthesized TOK discussion. Wow. I don't like doing that, to be honest. I don't like ending TOK discussions. But I'm terrible that way. You know, I get something going, and if it's a good discussion, I don't want to stop them. I mean, sometimes you do have some students who maybe want to veer off course and start talking about, you know, the latest football scores. But generally, my students are great, and when they start talking about TOK, they want to carry on going. They want to engage with each other. They want to engage with me. So I'm definitely not the best person to ask you, how do you end a TOK discussion? I don't think I ever do. I guess, you know, the lessons that I teach in TOK are very sort of very well structured. You know, they deal with some pretty amazing ideas, but because of that, I have to structure them very, very carefully with a starter question, with an individual task, with a group task. So we have to get through it. It's all on the sort of screen, the presentations that I use for my lessons. We want to get to an exit slip, an exit question that we have at the end. So, you know, I do love these discussions, and I do sometimes just let them go for it. But most of the time, you know, I'm trying to get them through the different ideas that I want them to take away. And I want to get them to that exit question because I want their ideas at the end of the lesson. So I guess that's how I do it. Should there be unanimous, ideal, standard answers to TOK questions? That's a very difficult question to answer. How do you answer a TOK question? You know, if you're an annoying teacher like me, you answer it with another question, right? Which they hate. But I don't know. Unanimity, definitely not. I don't think you should come to a unanimous decision about something. You're always going to have different opinions. Although, as I tell them, you know, you're obviously free to have any opinion on any question, but it should be supported by evidence. You should be able to justify. You know, justification is a key word in TOK. You should be able to justify your position, and if you can't, then I'd be uncomfortable accepting your idea. But you know, you can justify things in a lot of different ways, I think. So that would be probably my only answer to that question. As long as they can justify it, then it's an ideal answer to a TOK question. Someone has asked, how is TOK different from the scientific inquiry process? In science, we try to frame questions based on observations or existing information, trying to know more. Is it to integrate disciplines, which we do collaborate with physics, chemistry, or mathematics if needed? Well, obviously in TOK, we are not trying to do science. We're trying to think about science. So, you know, you're raising several issues there. You know, we try to frame the questions. Well, how do we do that? I mean, that would be an interesting question to come up with. You know, how do you come up with your original questions? And I've read quite a few articles quite recently, actually, about how, you know, we draw, although there is a method to science, and it can be very sort of it can be objective, it can be clinical. At the beginning of the process, sometimes it's a lot more intuitive. It relies a lot more on imagination. I mean, Einstein himself stressed the importance of imagination. And I've read articles recently comparing the beginning of the scientific process a lot like the beginning of creating a work of art. You know, you need to be inspired. You need to have an original inspiration, not eureka moments, because we don't really buy into that kind of idea about how to create knowledge. But you know, you begin a little bit more mysteriously than perhaps you are later on in the process. So that would be an interesting question to ask your students. You know, how do you begin? Ask them. I guess that's my answer to your question. How do we differ? Well, I throw it back to the student. How do you begin that process? Based on observations. Again, how do we do that? You know, I've mentioned the idea of theoretical physics. Do we need to observe it directly? To what extent can we rely on the technology that we use, the instruments we use to observe it? You know, at what point do we say, well, this is actually removed from the human experience? You know, for example, with the images of the black hole, M90, was that what it was called? Those images were generated. You know, that's not just me with my camera doing that. They were generated from reams and reams of mathematical data. So you're not really looking at the real thing. So does that count as observation? Again, another question that we could ask. Trying to know more, you know, that's the nature of science. Again, I think that perhaps leads on to some other questions. Collaboration. Okay, so to what extent can we collaborate? To what extent can we apply ideas from one field in the sciences to another field? And again, referring to another thing that I've seen recently, another TED talk by a guy called Jim Al-Khalili. He talks about using quantum physics in understanding bird migration, which is fantastic. So we have to do a bit of extrapolation and apply some ideas from one field to another. You know, how creative should we be there? Where should we take our ideas from when we are trying to understand something? How interdisciplinary should we be? And I think traditionally we have liked to classify everything discretely, separately. But increasingly in the world, we are trying to apply lots of things at the same time. Your question there has loads of different questions attached, and that would be the kind of thing that we would do in TOK. Okay, I think those were good questions. Oh, hang on, I've got some more. Is it important that all the subject teachers draft a proper lesson plan to integrate TOK within subjects, or an activity inducing TOK concepts is as valid as a TOK integration? That's kind of up to you, I think, and it's probably up to your DP coordinator. I mean, I've got to admit that I used to be a teacher who didn't plan lessons as well as I should have done, certainly early in my career. And I have to admit, being a door handle teacher from time to time, you know, not knowing what I was going to teach until I opened the door. And I always found teaching stressful, right? Go figure. Since I have planned my lessons incredibly rigidly, my life has become a lot easier. Now, that's not to say that you can do some interesting things with a rigid structure of your lesson plan. You know, sometimes you just want to go off and throw the plan away. I mean, mine tend to work, but sometimes, like I've said, you've got a great discussion going, you just go with that, right? And certainly I've had that in history lessons, talking about stuff to do with TOK. They were always my most interesting discussions, and I've just gone with that. But and also the other problem here is, as I've said, TOK I think has to be up to date. It has to be, you know, what's going on, what's been going on this week in the TOK world, and that's what I try to bring into my lessons. You know, we often have a little discussion at the beginning, maybe after the starter activity. Hey, did you see what's just happened here or there, or you know. So it's hard to plan. I think it's hard to plan. But yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of things that you do in Group 4 that connect to the kind of things that we do in TOK. I mean, you've seen the 12 key concepts. So as much as you can, perhaps make links with those, and you know, maybe when you're discussing something, you know, like evidence, well, you know, here's when I'll do a little bit of a TOK discussion about evidence. Interpretation is another word. You know, here's when I'll do a little bit of this, and maybe you can link it to a real life situation that you can find from me, or you could find for yourself. I hope that answers the question. Right, so those are some really good questions. Thank you for those. I would be very happy to answer more questions. I think I'll put these questions on the debrief if I didn't make full sense. I know I tend to get carried away, so I'll try and write those down as well on the debrief. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. I have another integration webinar coming up, I think not next week, but the week after that, on mathematics, which will be a challenge for me because I'm mathematically very weak. But I you know, I think it's an awesome subject and it works really well in TOK. I also have the final one, the Group 6 ones, I think at the very end of October or the beginning of November. And I also have a webinar for parents coming up, which I've never done before, and I'm quite excited about delivering that. So you can have a look on the site on the webinar page to find out more about that. These will all be free, so anyone can sign up, and I will be sending you all the debrief as soon as I can get it together. So many thanks for joining me this morning, and I hope you have a very good day / evening / early morning, depending on where you are. Many thanks. Goodbye.